Meanwhile, disarmament of the pharaohs becomes a universal slogan. The police are fierce, implacable, hated and hating fools. To win them over is out of question. Beat them up and kill them. It is different with the soldiers. The crowd makes every effort to avoid hostile encounters with them. On the contrary, seeks ways to dispose them in its favor. Convenience, attract, fraternize, merge them in itself. In spite of the auspicious rumors about the Cossacks, perhaps slightly exaggerated, the crowd's attitude towards the mounted man remains cautious. A horseman sits high above the crowd. His soul is separated from the soul of the demonstrator by the four legs of his beasts. A figure at which one must gaze from below always seems more significant, more threatening. The infantry are beside one of the pavement closer, more accessible. The masses try to get near them. Look into their eyes, surround them with their hot breath. A great role is played by women workers in relationship between workers and soldiers. They go up to the cordons more boldly than men. That hold off the rifles. Beseech, almost command. Put down your bayonets. Join us. The soldiers are excited, ashamed, exchange anxious glances, waver. Someone wakes up his mind first, and the bayonets rise guiltily above the shoulders of the advancing crowd. The barriers are opened. A joyous and grateful hurrah shakes the air. The soldiers are surrounded. Everywhere arguments, reapproaches, appeals, the revolution makes another forward step. Nicholas from her headquarters sent Kabalov a telegraphic command to put an end to the disorders tomorrow. The Tsars will fall in with the next step in Kabalov's plan, and the telegram served merely as an extra stimulus. Tomorrow the troops will say their say. Tomorrow the troops will say their say. Isn't too late. You can't tell yet. The question is posed, but far from answered. The question is posed, but far from answered. The indulgence of the Cossacks, the wavering of certain infantry lines this are but much promising episodes repeated by the thousand-voiced echo of the sensitive street, enough to inspire the revolutionary crowd, but too little for victory, especially since there are episodes of an opposite kind. In the afternoon, a detachment of dragons, supposedly in response to revolver shots from the crowd, first opened fire on the demonstrators near Gostini's Dvor. According to Kabalov's report to headquarters, 3 were killed and 10 wounded. A serious warning. At the same time, Kabalov issued a threat that all workers registered in the drafts would be sent to the front if they did not go to work before the 28th. The general issued a 3-day ultimatum, that is, he gave the revolution more time than is needed, that it needed to overthrow Kabalov and the monarchy into the bargain. But that will become known only after the victory. On the evening on 25th, nobody guessed that the next day had in its womb Let us try to get a clearer idea of the inner logic of the movement. On February 23, under the flag of Women's Day, began a long ride along withheld uprising of the Petrograph working masses. The first step of their insurrection was the strike. In the course of 3 days, it broadened and became partially general. This alone gave assurance to the masses and carried them forward. Becoming more and more aggressive, the strike merged with the demonstrations, which were bringing the revolutionary mass face to face with the troops. This raises the problem as a whole to the higher level, where things are solved by force of arms. The first day brought a number of individual successes, but these were more symptomatic than substantial. A revolutionary uprising that spreads over a number of days can develop victoriously only in case it ascends step by step and scores one success after another. A pause in its growth is dangerous, a prolonged marking of time fatal. But even successes by themselves are not enough. The masses must know about them in time and have time to understand their value. It is possible to let slip a victory at the very moment when it is within arm's reach. This has happened in history. The first 3 days were days of uninterrupted increase in the extent and acuteness of the strife. But for this very reason, the movement had arrived at a level where mere symptomatic successes were not enough. The entire active mass of the people had come out on the streets, and it was settling accounts with the police successfully and easily. In the last 2 days, the troops had been drawn into the events. On the second day, cavalry. On the third, the infantry too. They barred the way, pushed and crowded back the masses, sometimes connived with them, but almost never restored to firearms. Those in command were slow to change their plan, partially because they underestimated that was happening. The faulty vision of the reaction supplemented that of the leaders of the revolutionary, partially because they lacked confidence in the troops. But exactly on the Thursday, the force of developing struggle, as well as the Tsar command, made it necessary for the government to send the troops into action and in dead earnest. The workers understood this, especially their advanced ranks. The Dragons had already done some shooting the day before. Both sides now faced the issue univocally. On the night of the 26th, about 100 people were arrested in different parts of the city, people belonging to various revolutionary organizations, and among them 5 members of the Petrograph Committee of the Bolsheviks. This also meant that the government were taking the offensive. That will happen today. In what mood will the workers wake up after yesterday's shooting? And most important, that will the troops say? Most important, what will the troops say? The sun of February 26 came up in a fog of uncertainty and acute anxiety. In view of the arrest of the Petrograph Committee, the guidance of the entire work in the city fell into the hands of the Viborg Rayon. Maybe this was just as well. The upper leadership in the party was hopelessly slow. Only on the morning of 25th, the Bureau of the Bolshevik Central Committee, at at last decided to issue a handbill calling for an all-Russian general strike. At the moment of issue, if indeed it very did issue, the general strike in Petrograd was facing an armed uprising. The leaders were watching the movement from above. They hesitated. They lagged, in other words, they did not lead. They dragged after the movement. The nearer one comes to the factories, the greater the decisiveness. The nearer one comes to the factory, the greater the decisiveness. Today, however, the 26th, there is anxiety even in the rayons. Hungry, tired, child, with a mighty historic responsibility upon their shoulders. The Vyborg leaders gather outside the city limits amid vegetable gardens to exchange impressions of the day and plan the course of what? Of a new demonstration. But never will an unarmed demonstration led. Now the government has decided to go to the limit. These questions bores into their minds. One thing seems evident. The insurrection is dissolving. Here we recognize the voice of Kayurov, already familiar to us. And at first it seems hardly his voice. The barometer falls so low before the storm. In the hours when hesitation ceased, even those revolutionaries closest to the mass, the movement itself has gone much farther than its participants realized. Even the day before, towards evening of the 25th, the Vyborg side was wholly in the hands of the insurrection. The police station where wrecked individual officers has been killed, and the majority had fled. The city headquarters had completely lost contact with the greater part of the capital. On the morning of the 26th, it became evident that not only the Vyborg side, but also Pesky, almost up to Litany Prospect, was in control of the insurrection. At least so the police report defined the situation. And it was true in a sense, although the revolutionists could hardly realize it. The police in so many cases abandoned their layers before there was any threat from the workers. But even aside from that, riding the factory districts of the police could not have the decisive significance in the eyes of the workers. The troop had not yet said their final word. The uprising is dissolving, thought the boldest of the bold. Meanwhile, it was only beginning to develop. The 26th of February fell on Sunday. The factories were closed, and this prevented measuring the strength of the mass pressure in terms of the extent of the strike. Moreover, the workers could not assemble in the factories, as they had done on the preceding days, and that hindered the demonstrations. In the morning, the Nevsky was quiet. In those hours, the Tsarina telegraphed the Tsar, "The city is calm." But this calmness does not last long. The workers gradually concentrate and move from all suburbs to the center. They are stopped at the bridges. They flock across the ice. It is only February, and the Neva is one solid bridge of ice. The firing at the crowds on the ice is not enough to stop them. They find the city transformed. Posses, cordons, horse patrols everywhere. The approaches of the Nevsky are especially well guarded. Every now and then shots rain out for ambush. The number of killed and wounded grounds. Ambulances dart here and there. You cannot always tell who is shooting and where the shots come from. One thing is certain, after their cruel lesson, the police have decided not to explore themselves again. They shoot from windows, through balcony doors, from behind columns, from attics. Hypotheses are formed, which easily become legends. They say that in order to intimidate the demonstrators, many soldiers are disguised in police uniforms. They say that Protopopov has placed numerous machine gun nests in the garrets of houses. A commission created after the revolution did not discover such nests. But this does not mean that there were none. However, the police on this day occupy a subordinate place. The troops come decisively into action. They are given strict orders to shoot, and the soldiers, mostly training squad that is non-commissioned officers, regimental schools to shoot. According to the official figures, on this day about 40 are killed and as many wounded, not counting those led or carried away by the crowd. The struggle arrives at the decisive stage. Will the mass ebb before the lead and flow back to its suburbs? No, it does not ebb. It is bound to have its own. Bureaucratic bourgeois liberal Petersburg was in a fright. On that day, Rodzianko, the president of the State Duma, demanded that reliable troops be sent from the front. Later, he reconsidered and recommended to the war minister Belyayev that the crowds be dispersed, not with lead, but with cold water out of a fire hose. Belyayev, having consulted General Kabalov, answered that a dose of water will produce precisely the opposite effect because it excites. Thus, the liberal and bureaucratic upper circles, they discussed the relative advantage of hot and cold douches for the people in revolt. Police reports for that day testified that the fire hose was inadequate. In the course of the disorder, it was observed a general phenomenon that the rioting mobs showed extreme defiance toward the military patrol, at whom, when asked to disperse, they threw stones and lumps of ice dug up from the street. When preliminary shots were fired into the air, the crowds not only did not disperse, but answered these volleys with laughter. Only when loaded cartridges were fired into the very midst of the crowd was it found possible to disperse the mob. The participants, in which, however, will most of them hide in the yards of nearby houses, and as soon as the shooting stopped, come out again into the street. This police report shows that the temperature of the masses had risen very high. To be sure, it is hardly probable that the crowd will have begun of itself to bombard the troops, even the training squad stones and ice. That would too much contradict the psychology of the insurrectionary masses and the wise strategy they had shown with regard to the army. For the sake of supplementary justification for mass murders, the colors in the report are not exactly what they were, and are not laid on the way they were in actual fact. But the essentials are reported truly and with remarkable vividness. The masses will no longer retreat. They resist with optimistic brilliance. They stay on the street even after murderous volleys. They cling, not to their lives, but to the pavement, to stones, to pieces of ice. The crowd did not only bitter, but audacious. This is because, in spite of the shooting, it keeps its faith in the army, and it counts on victory, and intends to have it at any cost.